Supposing that the approach we're making is based on showing cogency out of our daily common sense. So, for instance, recently there was a debate between Bostrom, a theorist of physics, and so-called the nested virtual reality theory, or something along those lines, on the Joe Rogan show. And Bostrom had an argument where he said that if he posed a hypothetical, actually I didn't even see the interview, but somebody told me about it, but he presented the view that if it's less taxing to build a virtual reality, then the odds are that this is a virtual reality. It seemed to me that what his argument is based on a hypothetical or a standing presupposition, and one which he's been moving in for, let's say, quite some time, more than a decade, which is something that often happens with serious students of philosophy and of the world. One tends to get into a hypothetical and get locked into it. In a certain sense, when I speak of the genetic circle, I mean just that we do not do this, that we're always starting out anew. But of course, that's also just a slogan in a way, unless we really carry it out. Heidegger speaks of that there's always something worth thinking, even in everyday things. But Joe Rogan refused to accept this hypothetical, and I thought, from what I heard about it, rightly, because what he said is, why don't we just assume this is the physical world? Why do we have to bring in all this stuff about the virtual realities and the nested reality, and all this theory that's based on perhaps it could be a plausible scenario. So this guy Bostrom is intelligent. I've heard him speak on many other subjects. I didn't see this particular interview, but certainly he's a thoughtful man. But I think that he was, lava was pouring out of his ears over this notion that he couldn't break through to Rogan and get him to see his point. But what he was saying isn't really cogent to a sound mind, which has no special instruction in philosophy or in this case, a theory peculiar to Bostrom. Although virtual reality theories are, in one form or another, have been showing their face for several hundred years now, mainly based on the rise of mathematical physics, but then particularly based on this Cartesian break. And so what I want to say is, if we are making arguments for Da-sein, which begin from, as Heidegger would put it, what we grew into, the world we grew into, that we were thrown into. So the biological concern with the development of our brains is the main thing for a Da-sein analysis. It would be rather, we grew into a world, especially, or perhaps exactly through becoming effortlessly fluent in our native language, which means something far in excess of what it means to pick up a second language, because it means coming into our being in the first place. So I want to, my cure to the Bostrom example is that Bostrom should have said to Joe Rogan, look, um, the reason why this is cogent can be given in the following example, which demonstrates that we can't trust what we understand as our senses or our sense data. The world, to everyone on Earth, as long as can be remembered, has seemed to be solid underfoot. Moreover, one can add that it's always seemed that the sky was above, and to say what, then to go into this, a statement sometimes attributed to Galileo, such as in Bertolt Brecht's play about Galileo, which is probably largely fictional, where Galileo's making these witty remarks about maybe the ball is falling down, maybe it's falling up, maybe it's falling up. How do you know? These relativist remarks that have to do with the theory of the inertial frame of reference, which is the most important theory in physics. One can say, but we know, even though our senses tell us that the Earth is holding, is at rest, or it's solid under our feet, we know that it's spinning at an immense rate. We know that it's moving in other ways. This shows this is the door open, and we walk through this door, we get to other, and then we can, all kinds of other arguments and considerations which challenge our common sense data are more cogent. They're stronger and clearer to us because we see that there is an example which is very pervasive, which is all pervasive almost to our experience, where we're not experiencing things as they are, and moreover where ordinary contradiction doesn't help us, because the situation itself is contradictory. The world is at rest, but it's also moving. The state which we apprehend as being at rest, we can also apprehend as motion. There's all kinds of various considerations beyond that, and Heisenberg says we can fix that by saying, as it turns out, motion is always relative to something else. And we can fix that scientifically, as it were, but then science becomes not science in the proper sense, but it becomes rules, operational rules. It ceases to be a direct truth about reality. So in getting to the Da-sein concept, what I was getting at in the last video is that just being able to go over a rigmarole about what Da-sein is doesn't mean that we have any of the cogency of it, which is what I think is the case with Zizek and Zizek's rejection of Heideggerianism. So rejection rather than confrontation, because confrontation would require moving into the cogency of the concept. One path to that would be the following. In the Cartesian system, the intellectual substance is supposedly linked to a part of the brain, the pineal gland. And there's a long question about why does the intellectual substance already have a content? So, for instance, why do we have the idea of the equal? So, one could see that you could see um, two chairs, two ready-made chairs, factory-made chairs, which were identical, standing next to each other, and not say, oh, they're equal. Not if we simply didn't have the concept of equality. Why is the concept of equality already available to us? Why does the intellect already have a certain shape to it, as it were, that it has all these features? And then when you're thinking in the Cartesian terms, and you're trying to do a metaphysical science, which pushes towards engineering rationality, which pushes towards the understanding that science is about the measurable, then you will understand that as the features of the brain, which have developed in evolution, which have evolved, in other words, which have changed over time, have prepared the background of that. So it's not that we remember this notion of equality, but that it's somehow been eked out quantitatively into this quality that we call. That's one way of explaining it. There could be other ways of explaining it, but in any case, there's a link between the extended substance and the intellectual substance in that view of Descartes. Told that Steven Pinker takes this view in some sense, and that was part of what stimulated him to his blank slate argument, which I've critiqued in the past. A book which I've read, but I didn't notice that particular argument before. I'm not sure if it's actually in that book, but it must play some role in motivating him to write that book. It's an argument behind it. Da-sein too has these two parts, right? So there's the ready to and the immersion, which must be thought with greater exactitude. What register are we thinking the immersion in? We can think it in a kind of biological sense. We can think it in other senses. There's also the presence which corresponds to the beginning of philosophy, or the raising of the eyes of Index and Meander. What that consists of is given differently in different thinkers. This raising of the eyes, that which is available to us is always different. So one can see that we could think in the like way that we can think that certain features are immediately available to us in consciousness. Consciousness is not just consciousness to occur, consciousness simply, but it's rather a feature-rich consciousness. It's a kind of awareness which is aware of certain features, such as equality of in terms of measurement. This thing is equal to this thing. This triangle is like this triangle, and various different inflections and accents on that theme are already available to us. So in the same way, you could think in terms of Da-sein, which is both simpler, as Heidegger emphasizes, but also requiring us to think it more closely. There seems to be, it would, whatever is in the immersion will influence something corresponding to the emergent state in presence. So it's not that presence is just the arbitrary production of metaphysical systems, but all the good metaphysical systems correspond to something that is richly there in the immersion. Immersion can be given in all kinds of ways, but we must try to think the way Heidegger thinks it. Immersion could mean the same as that which the community considers useful. So this question of going beyond the usefulness, which then produces, which then, for instance, in the sense of the Plato and Aristotle referring to the Egyptian priests who are not involved in activity, which are mainly concerned with looking at the book of the night sky, astrology or astronomy, something which would not immediately concern us as environmental beings in the Umwelt, in the surrounding world. Although one could derive perhaps some knowledge that would be useful from the study of the stars. This break, strictly speaking, is the release from the immediate pressures of the environment. Epictetus, to buffer that, add something to it, says, I mean, that's not Epictetus's intention, but here it may help us in that sense. Says that philosophy began with pain. If you remember that, basically sorga, which is usually translated as concern, which is the feature of the Da-sein, means pain, something that pains us and then that we can alter or have before us in such a way that we can deal with it. And it corresponds to the notion. And you'll note that this is very important in Heidegger in that it corresponds to the sense of the Enlightenment Voltaire statement that happiness is a dream, pain is real. So there's no happiness or eudaimonia or beatitude in Heidegger. There's only sorga. So we feel that something is amiss and we try to fix it. That could be something clear and distinct, but it could also be big anxiety. It could be that I have an itch somewhere. That's a clear instance of sorga. Or that I'm disturbed because I think that I can't remember something that I want to remember, and I keep pushing myself to remember it. And that's an instance of sorga. Or I feel some guilt over something, or I'm exposed to some chance event which everything in my future depends on, and so forth. And perhaps the highest instance would be the existential anxiety, which shows me the ground of Da-sein in a fuller sense. So again, let's keep trying to think Da-sein properly. Yes, we should look more at Heidegger's text, but again, without knowledge, reading text is empty, as I would say Zizek's readings of Heidegger are wholly unhelpful to us because he doesn't have the knowledge that's necessary to properly grasp what Heidegger is pointing to, and probably also because he lacks the fundamental motivation. He's not pointed in the same way, but it's rather like it reminds somewhat of I mean, you wouldn't say a person in tribal life somewhere playing a traditional musical flute, let's say a primitive Stone Age flute, were kitschy. They're simply not moving in the same time register as one who we could call kitschy. You have to be in that register. So in this sense, I think people who don't see the necessity that